I spent an afternoon last month in a district outside Seoul that used to be famous for its noise. The kind of chaotic, high-pitched energy you only get from a primary school at recess. But as the clock struck mid-morning, the silence was almost physical. The gates were locked, the swings were still, and the colorful murals were peeling in the sun. This year, the number of children entering first grade across South Korea fell below 300,000 for the first time in history. It felt less like a demographic shift and more like a quiet, collective exit. You'd think the atmosphere would be one of frantic crisis, a nation scrambling to plug the holes in its sinking ship. But then you look across the sea to Japan, where they just announced a record 2.57 million foreign workers are now propping up their convenience stores and elder care wards. On paper, it looks like a pivot toward globalization, a desperate grasp for growth. However, when you stand in a Tokyo Lawson at 2 a.m. and watch a Southeast Asian student methodically stock shelves under the watchful eye of an 80-year-old manager, you see the contradiction. There's no talk of integration or a new era. Instead, there's a detached, almost clinical efficiency. These workers aren't being invited to join the civilization. They are being used as a biological patch to maintain a world that refuses to change its DNA. It left me wondering if we've been reading the data all wrong. We call it a collapse, but what if it's actually a biological strike? From the cutthroat competition of Seoul's exam hell to Japan's record-breaking foreign labor stats, these two nations are currently engaged in a profound civilizational mid-game. They are choosing a sterile, perfectly ordered contraction over a messy, multicultural future. They aren't failing to survive. They're choosing how they want to disappear.
That phrasing, choosing how to disappear, that really is, that's the absolute key to unlocking this entire phenomenon.
It feels like the right word, doesn't it? It's not an accident.
It's not. It completely reframes the narrative. You know, it stops being a story about economic failure and starts being a story about agency, about a deliberate will. We look at the charts. I mean, the plummeting birth rates in Korea, the aging wards in Japan, and our standard Western sort of growth-obsessed brains just scream, panic, fix it, import people, print money.
Right. It's a problem to be solved, full stop.
Exactly. But if you actually dig into the bureaucracy and the debt issuance strategies and the really fine print of the immigration laws, you realize they aren't trying to fix it in the way we think. They are engineering a new state of being. And I think for this deep dive, we should call it civilizational autarky.
Autarky? Okay. That's a term you usually hear in the context of, wartime economies or, hermit kingdoms. It implies a closed loop, a kind of self-sufficiency at any cost. So are you really saying these hyper-modern, globally connected, export-driven economies are turning inward?
Yes. Autarky in this context doesn't mean they stop trading cars or microchips with the world. That's the engine that pays for all of this.
Okay, so it's not North Korea.
Not even close. It means they are deciding to rely on their own internal social logic and their own cultural cohesion, even if the price of that cohesion is a shrinking population and a smaller overall GDP. It's a prioritization of identity over sheer expansion.
A choice. Cohesion over growth.
Yes. And looking at the research we have, covering everything from Peterson Institute data to the detailed reports from the Japanese Cabinet Office and political science papers on Korean governance, this strategy, this autarky, it really rests on three very distinct pillars.
So we're looking at a tripod of survival strategies, a three-legged stool that's holding this whole thing up.
But first, you have what we can call the golden filter. This is primarily, though not exclusively, happening in South Korea. It's the institutional mechanism by which the education system shrinks the base of the population, but drastically, almost brutally, tightens the standards to protect the elite apex.
Quality over quantity, taken to the extreme.
To the absolute extreme. Second, we have the economic calculus. This is the Japanese model, really. And it's a masterclass in using massive, almost unbelievable amounts of debt to maintain a first world aesthetic for a ghost population.
The beautiful, empty train stations.
And third, we have the biological patch. This is the part that ties it all together. It's the deliberate choice, the refusal to integrate immigrants, opting instead for this very specific mix of robots and temporary revolving door labor.
It sounds less like a policy platform and more like, a science fiction novel about a society preparing for a long winter.
I think that's a very fair comparison.
Okay, so let's start with that first pillar because it feels like the foundation, the golden filter. I've been tracking East Asian demographics for years. And, usually the narrative is tragic, empty cradles, sad, lonely deaths, the economic fallout.
Right, the demographic time bomb narrative.
I've heard whispers in Seoul, specifically among the younger generation, that frame this contraction as something almost elegant.
And interesting word.
I want to talk about a specific case, a story that really crystallizes this. He's a young man I heard about who graduated last year from one of the SKY universities,
The absolute top of the pyramid.
the Ivy League of Korea, but with even higher stakes, if you can imagine. Ji-hoon is living in a world where elementary schools are closing down and being turned into senior centers. The sheer number of students is vanishing from the system. Ji-hoon isn't relaxing.
The pressure isn't off.
It's higher than ever. The library isn't empty, intense, frankly fine. He told a friend that he feels like a survivor of a hyper-refined filter. He knows his degree isn't just a certificate, it's a gate pass. It's a pass to a bureaucracy that is becoming smaller, denser, and infinitely more exclusive. He described the South Korean state as distilling its population.
That word distilling is incredibly accurate when you really look at the political science behind this. Ji-hoon's experience, it isn't just an anecdote, it connects directly to a core concept known as Weberian bureaucracy.
Max Weber, the sociologist. Okay, I remember the name from college, but Weberianness sounds like a condition you'd see a doctor for. What does it actually mean in this context?
It does sound medical, doesn't it? But in political science, it's the gold standard. Weber basically defined the ideal bureaucracy as one driven purely by merit. Recruitment is open and competitive, promotion is based on skill, not on who you know, and administration is impartial. It's a machine run by rules, not by people's whims.
So the opposite of cronyism.
The absolute opposite. And the Quality of Government Institute has data on this. And South Korea, along with Japan and Singapore, scores off the charts. Historically, South Korea sits at a 13 on the Weberian scale.
At 13, what's the context for that number?
Well, for context, the average for developing countries is around 7.2.
Okay, so they are almost twice as bureaucratic, in the good sense of the word, as the average. But, I mean, hasn't that always been the case? You think of East Asia, you think of Confucian exams and this long history of meritocracy.
No. And this is the fascinating part of the history that makes it a deliberate choice. If you go back to the Syngman Rhee era in the 1950s, the system was completely rotten with patronage. I mean, something like 95% of bureaucrats were special appointments.
95%? So that's just polite code for I hired my nephew or I hired the guy who helped me win the election.
It was a pure who-you-know system, a spoil system. It was completely contrary to this Weberian ideal.
So how do they get from 95% nepotism to the golden filter that Ji-hoon is stuck in today? What happened?
They forced a shift. It was a conscious top-down project. Through the Park Chung-hee era and then accelerating into the democratic transition of the late 80s, they aggressively implemented the Hengzi, the higher civil service exam.
Yeah.
The exam became everything. By the 90s, over 70% of high-level recruitment was coming through this brutal meritocratic test. They literally flushed out the patronage and replaced it with raw, tested intellect. They broke the old system and built a new one based on standardized excellence.
Okay, but here's the paradox I just can't wrap my head around. We know the educational base is collapsing. We started with it. Fewer than 300,000 first graders. Basic supply and demand says that if you have fewer students, getting into a top university or a top government job should be a cakewalk. The competition should be diluting. Why does Ji-hoon feel like the walls are closing in?
Because the system isn't trying to fill seats. It's trying to identify a ruling cognitive elite. The reality described in the research is one of standardized excellence. As the provincial universities, the lower tiers of the pyramid, start to crumble and literally close due to a lack of students, the system doesn't lower the bar to save them.
It does the opposite.
It raises it. It focuses all the remaining energy, all the competition, all the societal pressure on the apex, on the SKY universities and the Hengzi. The exam hell isn't just about testing knowledge anymore. It's a ritual. It's a mechanism to ensure that the few people left running the country are, at least theoretically, the absolute best of the best.
It's a sacred filter. They're essentially saying, if we are going to be a smaller nation, we are going to be a smarter nation.
It's a profound commitment to quality over quantity. Back in the Park Chung-hee era, there was still a compromise. He wanted merit, but he also had to reward military loyalists and allies. Today, the institutional mechanisms that are in place indicate this terrifying, almost pure commitment to intellectual integrity. They are betting the entire future of the country on the idea that a highly capable, smaller bureaucracy is better than a bloated, mediocre one.
But wait, I have to challenge this slightly, because at some point, you just run out of raw brain power, right? If your population is shrinking that fast, eventually you can't just keep squeezing the same stone for more juice. Are they letting anyone else into this elite circle? Does the filter have a side door?
And that is a fantastic question, because this is where we see a fascinating exception that really proves the rule. While general low-skilled immigration is restricted, which we will get to later in a big way, there is a very specific, almost surgical carve-out for foreign talent.
The best of the best from other countries.
Exactly. It's not integration. The institutional mechanisms are designed for the highly selective, non-assimilative recruitment of foreign postgraduate talent. They want the PhDs in AI from India, the biotech engineers from Vietnam, but only at the very, very top.
So Jihoon might be sitting next to a genius from Mumbai in his graduate seminar.
Absolutely. But the system is designed to extract their intellect without necessarily assimilating them into the cultural body of the nation. It's a very specific kind of recruitment. They are brought in to keep the innovation engine running, to maintain that intellectual integrity of the corporate and bureaucratic elite, but they are often kept in a professional bubble.
So they're like intellectual mercenaries in a way.
Yeah.
Temporary brains for hire.
And it reinforces this whole idea of the country as a golden filter. It only wants the gold. It doesn't want the ore. It came in. It's a way to maintain the elite apex even when the domestic educational base is collapsing underneath it.
That resonates so much with the vibe and soul right now. It's not, how do we save everyone? It's who is worthy of leading the remnant. It's almost biblical in a way. And you can see the physical fallout of this choice when you leave the city. I've seen the photos of the provincial campuses. I mean, weeds growing through the tennis courts, dorms that look like something out of Chernobyl.
And that desolation is the cost of the filter. It's not an accident, it's a consequence. The Japanese Cabinet Office report, which is called Choice for the Future, it explicitly mentions this. It predicts that over a quarter of local governments to disappear.
They're just writing them off.
They are letting the limbs succumb to frostbite to keep the heart warm. All the energy, all the resources, all the talent is being sucked out of the countryside to preserve the hyper-efficiency of Seoul and Tokyo. These cities are becoming these incredibly dense fortresses of talent while the rest of the country hollows out.
This just forces us to consider the sheer nerve of the strategy here. You know, if you were designing a society that you knew was shrinking, what would you do? The intuitive answer, the Western answer, would be to lower the standards. Okay, let's make the exams easier so we can fill the desks and keep the universities open.
Right. Preserve the institutions as they are.
But they're doing the opposite. They're saying no. If we are going to disappear, we're going to be the most efficient, high-functioning society on Earth until the very last day.
It's the choice between dilution and distillation. South Korea has chosen distillation. You can have the smartest bureaucrats in the world, but you still need money to pave the roads and pay the pension.
Right.
And that brings us right to the second pillar, economic calculus.
You can't IQ test your way out of a budget deficit, no.
Yeah.
And this is where Japan offers a master class in what I've started to think of as the economic calculus of elegant decay.
That elegant decay.
I want to pivot to a different scene, a different story. Imagine an elderly woman living in one of those massive high-rise complexes on the outskirts of Tokyo. She steps out of her apartment, she walks to the train station. The train arrives with nanosecond precision. The seats are velvet, the air conditioning is perfect, the station is spotless.
The Japanese standard.
But she is the only person on the platform. She's the only one on the train. She walks through a park that is manicured with scissors, literally, by a team of city workers, but there are no children playing in it. This is what I mean. Japan is maintaining a first world shell for a ghost population.
And the fiscal weight of that, it must be astronomical.
It's what I call a noble, expensive stubbornness. They would rather pay the premium to keep that Japanese standard intact than admit defeat and consolidate services.
Yeah.
They will run the empty trains.
Noble, expensive stubbornness is a very poetic way to put it. An economist from, say, the Peterson Institute for International Economics would probably just call it unprecedented leverage.
Leverage.
The data on this is staggering. I mean, it's hard to even comprehend. Japan's general government gross debt has more than quadrupled since the early 90s, since their bubble burst. It's sitting at a world record roughly 260% of GDP.
260%. That's not a real number, is it? So, I mean, if I ran my household finances like that, I'd be in bankruptcy court.
Yeah.
If a developing nation did that, the IMF would be kicking down the door. How is Japan not collapsing under that weight?
And standard economic theory says this should be an absolute catastrophe, a debt crisis, hyperinflation, the works. But Japan made a very specific and very clever policy choice when the bubble burst and the aging process really started to bite.
What was the choice?
They had option A, raise taxes to pay for the growing welfare costs of the elderly. That's the responsible, painful German sort of route. Or they had option B, issue massive amounts of government debt to keep spending high without taking money out of people's pockets.
And they slammed the button for option B.
They slammed it, and they never looked back. Aggressively, they avoided raising taxes, which, kept the voters happy and maintained social peace. And they just kept building. They built those perfect trains and those empty manicured parks you saw. They maintained the Japanese standard with borrowed money. And the shocking thing is, for 30 years, it worked.
Worked. Seems like a very strong word for being in debt up to your eyeballs at 206%.
But look at the service costs. This is the magic trick. Because Japan is aging and shrinking, the economy is deflationary. People aren't buying as much, so prices don't rise. In that kind of environment, the central bank can keep interest rates at rock bottom, basically zero or even negative.
So it's like having a $10 million mortgage, but your interest rate is 0.01%. You can afford the tiny monthly payment, even if you know you can never, ever pay off the principal.
The technology. And here is the fact that just completely destroys the simplistic Japan is failing narrative that we've heard for decades. Real GDP per capita in Japan has grown at a rate comparable to the US or Europe over the last 30 years.
Again, we always hear about the lost decades. You're telling me the average individual Japanese person didn't actually lose ground financially?
As the loss in total GDP is almost entirely because there are fewer people. The overall pie is getting smaller, but the slice per person has stayed roughly the same size, or even grown slightly.
How do you maintain individual prosperity while a national economy is stagnating?
You manage it by squeezing every single drop of productivity out of the population you have left. The data is incredible. Japan has the highest male and female employment rates in the entire G7.
Everybody is working.
And they work longer. Japan has the highest effective retirement age in the OECD. You see people working well into their 70s and 80s, not because they're necessarily poor, but because the system needs them. That 80-year-old manager at the Lawson you saw, that's not a bug in the system. That is the system. That's the strategy. They are maintaining the infrastructure by keeping everyone in the game until they physically can't be.
So it's not a collapse. It's a kind of high-functioning, high-effort stasis. But this sounds like it relies on a very specific set of circumstances. Low global interest rates, a wealthy domestic population that's willing to buy all that government debt. Can South Korea pull off the same trick?
And that is the warning that is flashing bright red in all the data. South Korea is looking at the Japanese model, and they are sweating. The analysis highlights a two-way effect that is going to hit Korea much, much harder.
Why? Is it just that they are aging even faster?
It's the speed and the timing. Japan got rich before it got old. It had a massive cushion of wealth. And Japan aged when the rest of the world, especially its customers in America and China, was booming. They could sell Toyotas and PlayStations to everyone else to fund their debt.
Okay, so their timing was lucky.
Very lucky. South Korea, on the other hand, is aging while its main customers, China, Taiwan, are also aging. The whole region is getting old together. And the costs are vertical. Korean elderly healthcare costs are projected to explode to something like $390 trillion won by 2060. It's a cliff edge.
And because the workforce is shrinking at the same time, the tax revenue to pay for that is plummeting.
Costs go straight up while the income to pay for them goes straight down. It's a fiscal scissor that is going to cut the budget to ribbons. Japan had a 30-year runway to figure this out. South Korea has maybe 10. The Japanese debt strategy might not work for them if global interest rates rise or if their exports tank.
So Korea is trying to sprint a marathon that Japan was able to jog.
Yeah.
That explains the degrowth strategy that's mentioned in these reports. The open country idea, the strategic retreat from the rural areas, they're circling the wagons.
They're implicitly acknowledging that the first world shell is going to get smaller. It's like a star collapsing into a neutron star. It gets smaller, but incredibly dense and heavy. And this brings us back to the specific economic calculus of the cities themselves. They are focusing all their resources on maintaining the world-class, high-density infrastructure in Tokyo and Seoul, because that is where the productivity is. That's the engine room.
But there's a huge trap there, isn't there? You keep the city perfect, but the city has what economists call fixed costs.
Whether a train has 1 passenger or 1,000 passengers, the cost to run it, the electricity, the maintenance, the staff, is basically the same. As the population drops, the cost per person to maintain that perfection skyrockets. This is the fundamental sustainability crisis of degrowth.
And they're facing the political impossibility of radical public service consolidation.
Imagine, no politician can stand up and say, sorry everyone, we are closing this subway line because not enough of you are using it.
It would be political suicide. Absolute suicide.
So they keep running the empty trains, they keep paying the fixed costs of servicing an aging, non-productive population. It creates this beautiful, surreal, hyper-efficient environment. But financially, it all relies on that economic calculus of debt remaining cheap forever.
But even with the debt, even with the 80-year-olds working, there is a physical limit. Eventually, you just run out of bodies. You run out of hands. Who changes the bedpans in the hospitals? Who drives the trucks? Who stocks the shelf?
Right.
This brings us to the third pillar. And this is where the choices get really stark and maybe even a little dystopian. We've talked about the filter and the debt. Now we have to talk about the biological patch.
Or the lack of it.
Exactly. I recently watched a clip from a nursing home in a Japanese prefecture that's known for its extremely elderly population. And I expected to see what you see in the UK or the US, a diverse staff of immigrant nurses, a mix of languages, a kind of multicultural melting pot born of necessity.
That's the Western solution.
Instead, the hallways were just quiet, eerily quiet. They were patrolled by these sleek, unobtrusive robotic units. And there was this one moment where an elderly man was interacting with a specialized AI interface on a screen. And it wasn't cold or clinical. It was polite. It bowed. It spoke with the correct honorifics. It was, in this weird, profound way, Japanese in its soul.
Japanese in its soul.
And it struck me that for this man, and maybe for the state itself, the robot isn't a replacement for a human field. It protects him and the culture from the messiness of having to interact with a foreigner who might not know the customs or the language perfectly. It's a massive gamble that technology can bridge the labor gap without altering the cultural DNA of the country. It's a digital fortress.
You've just hit on the core tension of this whole strategy. The labor shortage is not a theory. It's mathematical fact. The data indicates that by 2025, which is basically right now, Japan faces a shortage of 380,000 care jobs.
1/3 people.
You cannot run an elder care system with empty air. You need hands. You need bodies.
But they aren't just opening the airport gates and saying, come one, come all, are they?
The legal framework they've built outlines a very complex, very deliberate system of doors. It's not one open gate. First, you have the front door. This is primarily for Nikkei people of Japanese descent, mostly from Brazil or Peru, whose ancestors emigrated a century ago.
So they get in because they have blood ties. Ancestry is the key. They are technically family, even if they don't speak the language.
They are seen as culturally safe. Then you have the side door. And this one is, frankly, the most cynical part of the whole system. It's the technical intern training program.
Ah, yes, the interns.
On paper, this is for technology transfer, teaching Vietnamese or Filipino workers advanced skills to take back to their home countries. In reality, it's a source of cheap, unskilled, and disposable labor for factories, farms, and construction sites. But the visa is strictly temporary. It is a revolving door by design.
So they aren't immigrants. They're batteries. You use the energy and then you swap them out for new ones.
But operationally, that's not far from the truth. And then you have the backdoor undocumented labor, which is often tolerated when the economy is desperate for workers, but is constantly squeezed and kept precarious. The Japanese Cabinet Office is explicit about this in their policy documents. They want strategic immigration of a highly skilled foreign labor force, but they specifically rule out the settlement of general foreign nationals.
The message is crystal clear. Come here, work hard, but don't get comfortable.
And don't bring your family. Don't put down roots. Don't integrate. You see it in the asylum acceptance rate in Japan, which hovers around 1%. This is a system that is meticulously designed to prevent the messiness of a multicultural society. They look at Europe, they look at the US, and they see social friction, identity politics, religious conflict. And their response is a very polite but very firm, no thank you.
So the robot is the ultimate solution. If you don't want the immigrants to stay, you build the steel caretaker.
The current policy landscape gives us a bit of a reality check, though. Right now, the robots in these nursing homes are mostly surveillance cameras on wheels or power assist suits for helping nurses with heavy lifting. They are not yet replacing the human touch of care.
So the technology isn't quite there yet?
Not fully, but the policy preference is undeniably for the machine. The government is financially incentivizing what they call Society 5.0. They are pouring billions of yen into this. It's a national project.
So it's not just a tech subsidy then. It's a social policy. It's a statement of values.
It's a comparative analysis of national will. Both the Japanese and the South Korean policy frameworks are structured to financially incentivize the rapid deployment of robotics and AI in elder care and logistics. They're doing this as a deliberate, institutionalized alternative to expanding permanent residency and social integration pathways for low-skilled foreign labor. They are betting the house that they can build a machine faster than their population collapses.
It's a choice for civilizational sterility. They prefer a quiet, orderly, automated contraction over what they see as a vibrant but messy and chaotic multicultural expansion.
It ensures that the care provided, the service provided, remains culturally homogenous. But it's a high-wire act. It's an incredible gamble. Can you automate empathy? Can you patch a collapsing demographic with machines and temporary workers forever? Or does the patch eventually tear?
We have the golden filter tightening the elite. We have the economic calculus buying time with debt. And we have the biological patch trying to keep the society pure. When you put all three of those pieces together, you have to step back and ask, is this a disaster? Or is it a grand design?
I think to answer that, we need to reframe our definitions. We look at a fertility rate of 0.72 in South Korea, and we call it a demographic crisis. But what if we call it a biological strike?
A strike, like a union strike against a factory owner.
Yes. The research is pretty clear on this, highlighting what's called the urbanization trap. The data shows that the megacities Seoul and Tokyo have the absolute lowest fertility rates. The system demands that everyone move to the city, work 80 hours a week, live in a tiny apartment, and compete in the exam hell. The population is responding with a kind of passive resistance. They're saying, okay, I'll do the work, I'll be productive, but I will not reproduce the next generation of labor for this machine.
I will work for you, but I won't make another me.
It's a non-violent, non-cooperation with the social contract. But here's the really provocative thought. Maybe the state, on some level, is okay with that. The term Japanification is starting to be redefined by economists. It's no longer seen as a failure, but as competent management of a very difficult economic transition.
So Japan is the model, not the cautionary tale.
In some ways, yes. Japan has maintained incredible social stability, crime is low, the trains run on time, people live longer than anywhere else on Earth. They've managed to grow old without a major social breakdown.
They are showing the world how to grow old gracefully as a nation.
They are fighting for the right to be less. That's what this is about. In a world that screams for more people, more GDP, more geopolitical influence, Japan and Korea are conducting this radical experiment in civilizational autarky. They are prioritizing cohesion and identity over growth and relevance.
It's the politics of the sunset, accepting that your best days might be behind you and focusing on making the evening as pleasant as possible.
And it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Is a country a failure if it shrinks by half but remains safe, clean, and culturally distinct?
That is a wildly uncomfortable question for a capitalist, growth-oriented society like ours. We are wired for growth. The idea of choosing to shrink is almost heresy, but looking at these horses, looking at the robot in the hallway and the silence in the schoolyard, it seems like East Asia is writing a different ending to the story of modernity.
And they are the pioneers. They are just the first. Europe is on the same trajectory, just a few decades behind. Eventually, China will follow. Japan isn't an outlier. It's a glimpse into the future for many developed nations.
So what we are seeing isn't a sinking ship. It's a spaceship, engaging its hyperdrive to a different dimension where enough is the goal, not more.
And the cost of that ticket is a closed border, a robot nurse, and a very, very difficult exam.
Today, I mean, from the empty classrooms of Seoul where this golden filter is tightening, to the ghost infrastructure of Tokyo being kept alive by mountains of debt, and then to the robot-patrolled corridors that serve as a firewall against cultural dilution, we've really seen that this isn't just a failure of policy. It's a specific, hard-edged, and deliberate choice.
And as we watch Japan and Korea navigate this path, we are in many ways watching our own potential futures unfold.
But before we go, there is one final thought we want to leave you with.
We often assume that survival means growth. More people, more GDP, more influence. But looking at Japan and Korea, we are witnessing a new kind of ambition. They are pioneering the politics of the sunset. The question isn't whether their strategy will work to save their economies. The question is, in a world obsessed with more, are they the only ones brave enough to ask what it means to have enough, even if that enough eventually means nothing at all?